up the, kia ora, Edward, and thank you, just setting up the slides. Right, so we're starting a little earlier, so thanks everyone for being here. Anita, did you just want me to kick off with the slideshow? Okay, great.
Actually, I've said yes, but this is the second part of the I can't help myself. This is the second part of the workshop. So these, the first lot of maps are when you think about the discussion we had last week about what types of rules or when we might like the rules, this is the where part of it. And then there's also maps that will show you buffers and things. So, and we'll talk you through the slides and the maps, but that's the context for what we're looking to get your direction on today.
Kia ora, Anita.
Thanks, Anita. Okay. So in today's workshop, we will look at the current air zones to begin with, what they are and what they're for the purpose of including updated air zones in the upcoming air plan. After that, we will run through some air zones where we have identified boundaries may be amended based on urban growth or other modelling. After that, we will look at whether council would like to consider including any additional towns in the air zones for air quality management. And then finally, we will look at some options for buffer zones. So our current air zones were made operative in 2003. And the reason behind splitting Otago into 3 air zones was for air quality management. Back in 2003, Arrowtown, Alexandra, Cromwell and Clyde were identified as needing more stringent regulations than the other urban centres and the rest of Otago. So you can see from this graphic that we currently have 22 areas, and then we also have air zone 3, which is the rest of Otago. And here is just a quick rundown of the current rules that exist within those air zones. So they're around the burners and the outdoor burning, just to give you a sense of what those air zones are there to achieve. So what do air zones mean for the new plan? Well, similar to the previous or existing plan, we will likely have more stringent rules for solid fuel burners and urban outdoor burning within air zones 1 and 2, and then air zone 3, rural Otago, we could potentially have carry over the existing rules for solid air burners, and we may look at updating those outdoor burning rules. So that's sort of where we're headed. So first of all, we'll look at the boundaries of the existing air zones, and after that we can discuss potential new air zone areas. In reviewing the boundaries of the current air zones, we took into consideration a number of things. We took into consideration the existing air zone boundaries, which are the current air plan maps. We took into account district planning zones, and we focused on residential, commercial and industrial. However, each TA has their own unique way of categorising their zoning. Their process is quite complex, and so the information you'll be looking at today may be subject to change. For example, the QLDC and Waikouaiti layers, they each have operative and proposed plans, so some of those layers are still subject to change. And I guess I'll note as well that what we're showing you today is really a starting point for the conversation. And so we're really keen to have your input, and of course there will be stakeholder input along the way as well with the consultation clause 3 and 4A. So the urban rural 2025 layer from Stats NZ is a really useful tool for us, as it takes into account a lot of different data, including district zones, to identify major, medium and small urban areas and rural settlements, and it contains the boundaries of those. And I'll be showing some of this mapping online in ArcGIS later in today's session. And finally, we've taken into account some future urban growth information. And some of this information may need to be verified before we use it, so just think of it as a guide for now. These mapping layers are included in the online map, which you received a link to yesterday with instructions on how to access it. But again, I'll show that as part of this presentation. So based on the review, we do recommend boundary changes in these areas, and I'll go through each map now so you can see which parts we're looking to change. So I hope you're ready for looking at a bunch of maps. The Alexandra air zone boundary is quite good currently, and we only suggest including the section coloured dark grey to accommodate planned future urban growth. So that's the top right-hand corner. And with all of these maps, we've sort of sifted through all the layers and selected the ones that seem most relevant, especially where they fall outside of the current air zone. I'm not sure if you guys want to discuss boundaries as we go, or maybe just have questions after the boundaries, after we've looked at all the boundary maps.
I think Councillor Forbes has a question.
Just wondering what the dark red zones are.
Oh, sorry, that's just a overlay of the dark grey. So
Oh, I see.
actually future urban growth has been identified in a number of areas according to this map, but most of them are within the current year zone 1 boundary. And so that's where the dark red.
Colour.
The green bit's a golf course at the top, isn't it?
Yep.
Thanks.
Yep, so yeah, so that's State Highway 8 going through there, golf course on your top right.
Yep.
The tailings down on your left, and then just extend to that recreation reserve just on the south side of.
Yes. No. So if we've encaptured through to the golf course, and we've really encaptured the residential work that's underway at the moment.
Is it best to try and cover off as we go?
I think
Yes.
so.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. Thanks.
So I guess really what we're asking is, does this look right? I mean, broadly, are we in the right sort of area, encapsulating those future areas? So if you had a residential, like if you had a house in these areas,
Kate,
the rules
sorry,
apply.
Councillor
Yep.
Wilson.
Sorry, we talked about the Bridge Hill area yesterday. That's very high compared to these other areas. Are they in an environment that you'd be concerned about, or that they could? I suppose if they're already in the existing area, then you're not concerned about them staying in there, even if they are high up.
Yeah, no, so we'd recommend that Bridge Hill stays in, despite the fact that it's elevated. They're already in it, and subject to those rules.
All right. Moving on.
Moving on, thank you.
Sorry, could I just ask through the chair?
Yes.
I just wanted to understand the future urban growth, because there's a few maps that obviously we're going to look at. So wherever you've targeted future urban growth, that's where we're most likely to have residential development, because obviously there'll be other spatterings of growth as well. So what's been the definition used behind the particular areas you've targeted?
So Karen, as I understand it, each of the TAs have given us the areas that they've identified as future urban growth. So that might be already via a plan change or through a future development strategy spatial plan. And so our intent would be to make our airsheds larger where those future growth areas are outside of the existing airshed boundary. So we can.
Okay, so it's reliant on the TLAs and their prioritisation.
Yeah, work that the TAs have done, that's right, yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Great, I'll move on to the next map. Here we have Arrowtown, and we've used a different lay here, which is the QLDC urban growth boundary from the proposed district plan. And it just shows a little growth in the bottom right-hand corner. Actually, a little bit at the top as well, but so I guess we would propose taking the wider of the boundaries and creating a new boundary for Arrowtown. Any
We're happy with
questions?
that. No questions, comment, confirmation. Seems right. Good.
So moving on to Clyde. Yep, some future urban growth is planned south of the city centre. And we would suggest ring fencing the entire area rather than allowing some emissions in that middle corridor. That's right, yeah.
Kia ora, Councillor Callaghan.
Yeah, that stuff in the middle is underway with development now, so I'd be suggesting that that be infilled.
Do you,
It's the
you want
intent.
the whole grey, do you want that grey and red triangle at the top as well? To close in, so that you'll leave that wee white
That's
triangle.
the rail trail head
Yeah.
and the and I think there is a
The price.
subdivision proposal above beside the cemetery, which is the yellow section. So maybe it's worthwhile to include that triangle too, with the hill, the natural contour being the boundary.
Can I just, so I can see that, looks. Feel like I'm a teacher now, so we'll fill this in.
Yep.
Fill this in,
And
but
the
leave that. Or
yeah,
fill
so
right up to the original one.
just from the cemetery back towards Clyde, just that bit there. I think there's an application in place for that, for a denser development.
There, that will all be filled in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just noting Karen and Kate can't
Oh.
see what we're pointing to, so just
Yes.
might verbalise that, just so they're aware.
Okay, so Karen and Kate, that's the area on the east side of the state highway. If you're going up the hill out of Clyde, that backs up onto the cemetery, and then the area out to Mutton Town. So it's filling in the two white gaps between the grey blobs, and then a small white gap that's beside a slightly yellowed.
Yep.
patch on the other
Yep.
side of the highway.
Yeah, really
That's
clear.
the only thing I can do that on, because it's the only one I know very well.
And that's
Yep. No, understood, thank you. And that probably also fills in what I wanted to understand, because it seems some of the comments that the councillors have made have also been cognizant of some specific geographical things to take into account as well. Thank you.
that's only logical because of those grey areas identified.
Yes.
Then
Yeah.
It's illogical to not include those.
All right, settled on that? Good, thanks, Amber.
Very helpful, thank you. Moving on to Dunedin, a bit of a special case. In the existing plan, it is divided into 5 air zones, which you can see there, and we recommend combining them into a single air zone, and also reaching out to include Brighton and Portobello. And that recommendation is based on emission density modelling, which is available to see in the online map as well. In this map, we're just ignoring Mosgiel for the moment. And so again, we would recommend using the outer boundaries that you see, whether they be grey or pink.
Hello, Councillor Smith.
Is this a public workshop?
Yes.
At this moment. The grey zone that you've got there for Mosgiel, I think there's been some zoning changes for commercial zoning. Is that right? I was thinking of the inland port. It's being
Hasn't been
proposed.
rezoned yet.
I do have a
Hasn't
separate
been-
map for Mosgiel.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah, it's not being discussed in this particular map,
right.
but for Dunedin, it looks very logical.
Yeah.
Yeah. Miranda?
Great, moving on. Queenstown, another area with a lot of growth. And based on the emissions density and urban growth modelling, we do suggest widening the boundary to include Jack's Point and Henley's Farm, and up to the north Arthur's Point, and also Lake Hayes. The grey area that you see, the light grey urban rural boundary, it also includes Mount Creighton and Closeburn, which are zoned rural residential, so they could also be included within the Queenstown zone.
It's got a bit of development there, isn't it? At Closeburn and Mount Crichton scheduled as well.
That all looks to make sense to me. I would say it's not very long until some areas like Frankton, in Air Zone 1.
So this will pick up Frankton.
Yes, I know this does, but that's for Air Zone 2, right?
No.
Oh, that's
No.
going into Air Zone 1. No, explain to me what's
Don't worry,
going on.
I think don't worry about the existing zones. The rules will apply to Frankton as they apply to Queenstown. So it's existing Air Zone 2. We're saying let's make the Air Zone bigger to include the future urban
For
growth
the Air
in
Zone
those
2,
areas. Yeah.
and what I'm saying is that I think parts of this are going to have to fall into Air Zone 1 at some point.
That wasn't an option discussed at the last workshop.
Okay.
Yeah, we didn't present including say Frankton
I know,
and
it
those
has
more
been.
stringent rules.
Yeah. I think we've got a measurement thing there now in Frankton. I think there's we stuck a
Yeah, so
measuring thing, and I don't think it's going to be that great, but we'll see. Okay.
So in terms of Clyde and Crichton,
Yeah, I reckon they need to be in.
You reckon?
Well, there might not be anything much now, but like if you think of Bob's Cove down there's a lot of development there, and it's really low up against the lake and against the hill.
But it's being done in a more considered manner in those areas, more exclusive type properties as opposed to dense. You're not going to see multi-unit developments or.
We've already got that down by the lake there, at Bob's Cove.
Yeah, I suppose you have in small clusters.
And small clusters, yeah.
Yeah.
But this is.
But you won't see it to the density that you'll see in and around the fringes of, say, in Hanley's Farm or Jack's Point.
Well, you haven't got that much of that around Kelvin Peninsula either. I don't know, but I would. It seems to make sense to me, but I'm not sure what
yeah.
data you're looking at to get it there. But
Yeah. Yeah. No. Maybe it makes sense to have it there.
I think we would recommend including Clyde and Mount Crichton due to in Sunshine Bay we have actually very high emission densities,
Yeah.
and so that may be the case along that waterfront area. I can move on to the next map.
Can I just check in the detail here? The effect of being that increasing these areas will do what? There's a lot of existing in there, but there's a huge potential for infill and increased density. So it's good to get it in now, but what will the effect be on an existing house?
It really depends on where the airplane rules land, which will be decided at the 19 council meeting. But for example, if this area were in, for example, is zone 2, if there was a rule in urban areas to require only ULEB burners for new installs, then all these areas would be captured by that.
I haven't got my computer open, so I'm only on a phone at the moment. But I'm just trying to remember the difference between Air Zone 1 and Air Zone 2 and the effect of the rules.
Yeah, so those haven't quite landed yet, but
I know.
I think that staff would probably recommend, and I will touch on this towards the presentation, but those 6 priority towns that we talked about in the last workshop, Alexandra, Arrowtown, Cromwell, Clyde, Milton, Mosgiel, requiring more stringent rules for urban outdoor burning and burners than the rest of the urban areas. At this moment in time, Queenstown would still be in one of the other urban areas, not a priority area.
Yeah. Okay, so it won't have the same effect to existing. That's that's good. I just wanted to check.
So we'll move on from Queenstown now, if everyone's happy.
Yeah.
So Wānaka, much of the growth has been towards Alrowtown, which we suggest including within the Wānaka air zone.
I would think so.
Yeah. Makes sense.
Great. And finally, I think Hāwea, quite a lot of urban growth has occurred and is predicted to occur. So we'd look to extend the boundary to the south.
Yep.
Great. Fantastic, we're racing through. Are there any, let me just see what my next slide says. Oh, Kingston. We would suggest including Kingston Village within the Kingston air zone.
Seem to concur.
Great. Oh, Ōamaru.
Now I have one piece of feedback from Councillor Malcolm. We're drawing some lines on that.
You're not allowed to point, Anita.
I'm going to point and describe. So Karen and Kate for online, if you see the small triangle on the east side that juts out from Western to Cormacs, Councillor Malcolm suggested we take the tip of that triangle and join it up at the top where Parsons Road meets White Rocks Road and fill that area in. You see there's a lot of development in this triangle
He
here.
has been there.
That was his only piece of feedback. I hope you understood that explanation.
That's good.
Yeah.
Karen, I think that was that Karen had a thumbs up.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, it's good local knowledge.
And councillor.
And Councillor Wilson, right. So that's been confirmed. No objections? No. Yeah, thanks.
Great, that's really good feedback, thank you. Right, so that is all of the changes to boundaries that we are proposing. And we still have a number of air zones where we're not proposing any changes to boundaries, but I will run through those maps regardless so that you can let me know what you think. Cromwell. So for some of these areas, there is definitely urban growth occurring, but they just happen to be within the existing boundaries. For other areas, there may not be a lot of urban growth, but Cromwell is definitely one where the existing boundary just covers that growth area.
Did CODC identify out of Ripponvale Road the new development behind the big cherry orchard? That's I can't remember the name of the farm.
Yeah, just on the
Right hand side goes into that gully, so it's
it's in here, right?
yep, that's the orchard in there
So it's in this Shannon Farm.
behind Ripponburn and
Shannon Farm.
Shannon Farm. Yes. So there's some quite dense development proposed in that.
Did it get approved or declined?
I think sections of sale.
We'll have a look.
It's been marketed.
We'll have a look at the Shannon Farm area and pick it up if it's been
Yeah.
rezoned or, oh, yeah, approved, yeah.
Good. So we,
I was wondering, I was just wondering about like the motorsport park and if there were any reasons to include or not include that into the air zone. Obviously not residential, but
There's lots of residential in there,
in the
in Motorsport Park.
is there a reason we wouldn't include that then?
I don't know.
We can look at including Motorsport Park.
Just a question. Yeah.
Obviously wouldn't affect the fumes from the cars, but
Yeah.
I think it had quite strict covenants on the residential units developed within there.
You can't rely on covenants.
Yes, that's very good.
You cannot.
Councillor Wilson, you got your hand up to.
Yeah, look, I'm just interested. There's a lot of development happening in Bannockburn, which is sort of linked in the bottom of this map along that. What I can't think what the name of the road is. And I'm just checking. There are no issues in Bannockburn because that is a relatively high growth area, isn't it? It's adjoining the lake.
I think we don't know about Bannockburn, so we wouldn't want to include it at this point,
Okay.
Yeah, I wouldn't have thought including Bannockburn would be a necessity at the moment.
It's okay. I'm just checking. We're talking about you get ribbon development between those two places, and it's going to be hard to tell. But yeah, maybe not.
10-year plan, isn't it?
Okay, moving on from Cromwell.
Yes, thank you. Amber.
Milton. It's already quite a large air zone, so we don't have any suggested changes.
Thank you.
Moving on. Mosgiel. Again, we don't suggest any changes, but happy to take any suggestions.
Councillor Wilson.
Sorry, I haven't loaded my hand, but so this, if you compare this to the Dunedin map, and I'm sorry to sound, the one when we showed the Dunedin, you've got the Wingatui area covered, and you've got, and this covers the new development around Rolls Place, but it doesn't do all of the Puddle Alley area.
So Councillor Wilson, you're referring back to the Dunedin map where there was a larger grey area over Mosgiel?
Yes, there was. And so what you had is you had a large, you've included the new-ish area being Walls down Riccarton Road, which is great, but you haven't included the stuff around Puddle Alley and Wingatui.
Yes.
Urban Rule 2025 and not official. The data that you saw.
Are those areas captured within the light grey on this slide? Yes.
On this one they are, but not on the other one.
Okay, great. Well, then we can definitely look to use this boundary rather than the other one. Yep.
That's fine.
I think there's possibly a question as why they were different, but if you're happy,
well, the pink zone is our current air zone, and the grey is the urban rural layer, which is a Stats NZ layer, which defines urban areas based on a lot of different information. So yes, they look different, and we are happy to use the most relevant layer. So we could extend it to the outer edges of those layers.
okay, sorry. It would be inconsistent with every other thing we're doing if we didn't do it here, but we did it in Brighton and right along the peninsula though.
Yep.
Thank you.
Moving on to Palmerston. And again, we don't suggest any changes, but happy to hear any feedback.
No indication.
I think it's really good for Palmerston, given the amount of time ago and out of there. I couldn't agree more.
Thanks, Karen. It's awesome. Everyone's got a little bit of local knowledge in different spots. It's fabulous.
Great, moving on to Balclutha.
No comments.
Okay, no comments is good. Yeah. Waikouaiti.
Sorry, I'm slow on the buttons here today. Now, Balclutha again, and I know I've shown photos of Haitangata. I'm just putting it out there that some of those areas are equally urbanised as Balclutha, very close by. There is some development down towards Stirling.
Yeah. We'll
I
move
do
on.
wonder, yeah.
We have a section on new areas to consider, Councillor Wilson. Coming up shortly. So no comment on Waikouaiti
Seems not. Thanks.
It's good. It's good.
and Ranfurly.
No, it's fine.
Roxburgh. We have a lot of towns in Otago.
No comments?
It's fine, I think.
Naseby.
So,
This is the last of these maps, and then we can move on to something else.
yeah, no, that's okay.
Looking good. Okay then. So in short, the options for the boundaries of the areas we've just looked at are, we could keep the current air zone boundaries, or we could extend them as we've just discussed now, in those areas that require extension. And we've taken notes on your feedback, so we will add in that information as well.
Got it, thanks.
Okay then, so moving on. So as a result of looking at those areas, as a result of combining Dunedin's 5 air zones into 1 air zones, we go from having 22 areas to having 18 areas. And based on what we are proposing for the rules, the air zones might look something like this. But we can also now talk about including more areas, as Councillor Wilson brought up. So, but this is just a slide to show you that the change between what we had before and what we're sort of proposing now.
Should Brighton be blue?
Brighton? Yeah. What's that, sorry?
Should it be blue?
It's part of Dunedin. Brighton's part of the Dunedin airshed. Now,
So yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
What I was meaning.
Apologies, Councillor Lawson. I'm just going to keep going because I think we're about to talk about what you'd like to talk about. Okay, new zones to go.
You're breaking up, I think, Councillor Wilson, I think the signal might be.
It just seems like it's going on.
I think we'll just keep going. Yeah.
So the towns that you see on the slide represented in blue are the 18 current air zones, with Dunedin's 5 air zones represented by Dunedin. As you can see, Brighton is a small urban area. However, it's not currently an air zone, although we do propose including it in the Dunedin air zone. Of the 42 rural settlements, only Kingston, Naseby, Palmerston, Ranfurly and Roxburgh are currently air zones. And if you're wondering what a rural settlement is, the next slide will explain. It's a Stats NZ classification. And they are, well, you can see here that you would have resident population between 200 and 1,000, or at least 40 residential dwellings. It's a compact area with a visible centre of population and a particular population density, and it contains at least 1 community or public building. So that's the basis of the rural settlements. And here we have Otago's rural settlements. So the blue towns are the settlements that we recommend to become new air zones based on emission density, low dispersal rates, and also predicted urban growth. So we haven't mapped these areas as yet, but we would probably use the urban rural mapping tool. So Benha, Glenorchy, Hampton, Kaitangata, Luggett, Mauriki, Pisa Moorings, Stirling and Tapanui. And I guess we're really interested to know from you if you think we are missing anything important here.
Not that I know of.
No.
Just perusing your names and.
What about terrace?
That's true.
Oh, so I've got a shop and a school.
Could have a mine.
Mention the name.
Yeah, I don't know if it'll make the definition. It might not be too remote. So many people live in terrace.
It doesn't have to meet the definition. If it's an area that you want to protect with rules, then we could look into it, I think.
Well, looking into it won't hurt, would it?
Look into it.
No immediate suggestions coming forward that I perceive.
If I may, through the chair, Councillor Wilson did ask about Bannockburn before, so I don't know whether or not she would want to raise it here.
Has she gone offline again?
I think from a.
Sorry. I'm just having trouble getting my screen to come up with the button. Sorry. The question about Bannockburn is, as you look at the map of Cromwell, there's housing going up past where the Polytech is, and it was just checking that there isn't stuff down by the lake that's happening or likely to happen that should be similarly have the rules, because what those grey areas we're looking at are future growth areas. Where two towns are joining together, they don't always have that growth planning, and I'm just making sure that we're being consistent, or at least looking at the risks of that infill happening. And maybe the hill behind Bannockburn, also between the Bannockburn over the bridge, precludes the inversion layer. I don't know.
Councillor Kelleher.
I see where Kate's coming from, but I think Bannockburn has such a degree of separation based around its elevation above the lake, and then the sort of rural residential and the vineyard areas that sit between the lake and the Bannockburn hamlet, say. There are some developments proposed or in consent processes at the moment for that'll increase the density possibly of Bannockburn, but not to a huge extent. And because of its elevation and separation from Cromwell, I don't see it as being something that is at risk of a logical infill in between.
And I'll just add, given I fuck up back to Glenavy, it's actually in ECAN's territory, not ours, so we did not step on their toes.
No, that's good.
All right.
Great. So we will be bringing this as an option in the 19th of March paper. And we'll have a look at Terrace, and we can have a look at Bannockburn, and we can just make sure that that everything is as it should be, and we can make that recommendation in the paper if you're all comfortable with that.
I'm wondering, sorry, excuse me through the chair. Option 3, I mean, basically you're getting some kind of steer from people who may have some idea of those areas, but there's areas that none of us around this table know very well. Is option 3 a better option? And Makaroa is not there, but I think it's so small it probably doesn't meet the criteria, but I'm just wondering why we're not doing option 3. Or we might be, but it's the arguments against option 3, put it that way.
Yeah, or it wouldn't make 200.
I shouldn't think so, no.
Right.
I don't know. That's my point.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No.
Councillor Floyd.
No, none of them have been turned on today. They have not. Well, who knows? I was just going to say that it just might be quite difficult for us to justify that kind of level across all of the settlements. And we do still have the Air Zone 3 as in kind of like a baseline, approach. So, but I mean, we can certainly look into it and explain the pros and cons of that for the paper.
Okay,
what I was going to say, but
that's good.
Yeah.
That gives me some idea. Thank you.
Great, so we will move on now to the buffer zones conversation, and I'll pass you over to my colleague Vivian.
Yeah, there we go. Kia ora. So we talked about buffer zones in the last workshop as a way that we could use to manage outdoor burning on rural land that surrounds certain urban areas.
I'm just going to interrupt and say there wasn't universal support for this, but there was enough support for us to map them, show them to you, and bring them to you next week. So just want to be clear, and I'm not looking at Councillor Kelleher. The decisions were made.
Intently at you.
I know, I can feel it.
I was going to say it's nothing compared to what we get in Queenstown.
We just want to show you what they look like and then to bring it through next week for decisions. So no decisions are made. Sorry, but
Yeah, no, that's a very good thing to say. Yeah, so really, like with the air zones, everything that you'll see for this is just sort of a starting point. for discussion. So what buffer zones might look like in the new plan, if we use them, is that within the mapped buffer zones, there would be rules that restrict larger scale outdoor burning activities during winter. And based on some science advice, we're recommending that those buffer zones are again around the 6 priority urban areas. And for today's discussion, we've started off with a 10-kilometre buffer zone and mapped what that would look around those urban areas. And yes, that's just showing what that 10-kilometre buffer zone would look like if you didn't adjust it to take into account things like topography or land use type. So it's just a very simple start. So if you go on to the first one, which is Mosgiel, yeah, that's what 10 kilometres would look like around Mosgiel. Obviously, it goes right over the hill into Brighton.
So, sorry, Edward.
Sorry.
So just taking a simplistic sort of squircle in a big area like that encompasses some big areas of nothing really, or very sparse land use.
Yeah.
That then creates an imposition on those activities. Yeah, I guess all of these maps are going to have that big circle.
But something that we can do is look further into like the land use types and stuff.
Yes.
And adjust it, if that's what you'd be interested in.
Yeah, but also in each of these, as you come out from the dense municipal area, you have a rural residential area that still has land use activity that needs a window to be able to burn within certain parameters. And if a buffer zone was going to be so restrictive that it was a total burning limitation, then that's going to create a lot of issues for those people. The buffer zone situation really worries me.
So that's a resource consent required to do it burn within.
Yeah, over whatever winter duration it would end up being, that would be what it would be. Over whatever period of winter months, outdoor burning in that buffer area wouldn't be permitted. You'd have to get resource consent.
Would it be resource consent, or would it be something similar to a fire permit type situation that's currently in place in a restricted fire season?
It would be a consent because it's coming through us. The information requirements and everything could be similar. Well, actually, I guess that would be fire. It's more about fire risk, and this would be more about air quality. But yeah, it would be a resource consent.
Right.
Yeah.
I can see some pretty strong opposition just because of the consent process, the time frame needed, the uncertainty of being able to meet that window that potentially is only available certainly in your drier areas, because the window keeps getting narrower, but the burning is a necessity. So
yeah, good to consider.
Councillor Wilson has a question about Waikouaiti Bridge. Is that for a later map or?
Sorry, that was just to check. Naseby is correctly as in Canterbury, but I'm just checking that Waikouaiti Bridge isn't big enough to be considered as a township. It's usually considered with Naseby as a town. And in this instance, I'm just checking on when you've got looking at their village size. They would hate to be missed out if they should be in there.
I'd love to be.
There are quite a few houses there.
Yeah, we'll have a look.
It's big. Yeah.
Just checking really the settlement immediately south of the bridge.
Yeah, it's called Waikouaiti Bridge Settlement.
Yeah. All right, anything further on the Mosgiel? Oh, sorry, Councillor.
Not Mosgiel specific, but you mentioned the geography and stuff would make things look a bit differently if we took that into account. Is that something we're coming to later, or should I ask around how that?
We haven't met at
Okay.
this point. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have any like a general sense of how that might would the buffers need to be further in, areas where there might be a steep incline, or how would that work more or less?
Does anyone other than me want to answer that one, or are you happy to leave it to
conversation before?
It's okay if we don't know yet.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much, right?
Sorry, I didn't hear the conversation because I could probably make something up. I probably have a.
You want to try and make something up? I was just asking about how, if we take into account the geography, how that might make the circles look, what shape would those circles become?
Yeah, and I think the point is we haven't done it, but we'd have to choose some kind of elevation line and map them that way. And I don't know if we've got any science that could support. I mean, there's not necessarily, there is some science around this, but it's trying to get a position that we're comfortable to defend. I don't know, sort of looking at Sarah, elevation wise, I don't know if we do our models that way or anything. No.
I don't think it was considered. There's not a lot of scientific information on outdoor burning in general, so it's quite difficult.
Yeah. So for Kate and Karen, that was just Sarah and the science team saying we don't have a lot of information about outdoor burning in general. So we don't have an elevation aspect that we could necessarily add.
So we don't.
Well, with all respect, you've got an inversion layer that you'll know is the general average, and if it's above that, then it shouldn't go under it. I would have thought that would give you a fairly good elevation. The other part of that is, where is the science is saying it's 10 kilometres? And you obviously have seen it, but I don't think we have we?
No.
No, that's just a report that we've had from Dr. Emily Milton, is where that 10 kilometres came from, but I don't believe that's gone to council, no.
Well, I would be very interested to see that.
Yeah, we'll check, and if we haven't provided it to you, we'll circulate that.
All right, it's next thing.
This one's fairly similar looking, but it's Milton. Yep, if there are no comments, we can move on. It's just an overview of the Central Otago ones because they're all sort of quite close together and several of them overlap. So go on to the next one, you can see them slightly more detailed.
So Franklin would be in Arrowtown.
Yeah, but this is it. Yeah, it's for more for outdoor burning, isn't it?
Yeah, move on to Cromwell. Yeah, at this point, they obviously all do look relatively similar.
Councillor,
Just a question around the actual mapping of these circles.
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure out, I can't quite tell from here, maybe it's on an angle, if these are perfect circles or not, because obviously if they're perfect circles, I presume you're taking it from the centre of the air zone, which would mean a bigger air zone would have a
It's
smaller
just
buffer.
From the air zone 1, a 10-kilometre buffer from that. So it's not from the centre, it is from the boundary of air zone 1.
Yeah.
Or 2.
So that they'll be kind of floppy if the air zones are weird too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Thanks.
These are good. I've heard blobby in a council workshop before. That's good.
Yeah. Alexandra. Yes, we can move on to the options maybe. Yeah, so we could go with a set distance, or we could have a bespoke buffer zone where we take into account things like land use type and topography, or we could have no buffer zones.
And there could be a variation based on the towns as well. So let's say we could possibly choose a 10K buffer for town X, but a very bespoke buffer for a different town. So there's endless possibilities.
Councillor Wilson.
So apologies, just a police car going rearing past me. I just want to check what the stakeholder engagement will be for this before in the rural areas to understand the effect on rural activities and burning. At what granular level will you do that?
So that'll be an active discussion for the council paper in March. We've got options around continuing with the existing timeline, which means we've done the consultation, or doing additional consultation, and then we would drill into that detail. So that was a request out of the last workshop. So you'll be able to have that conversation then.
Yeah, but I mean, the last consultation was very urban orientated, wasn't it?
No, we covered all the topics in the last lot of engagement.
Did we map the 10-kilometre areas?
No.
So how would people, if they were in the room, known that was a consideration, and therefore given you some thinking on it?
We just asked them about how to manage outdoor burning and to understand what it looked like, and then we got the direction from the council table around buffer zone. They haven't seen maps.
No, and so were the people that were likely to turn up to the meeting, the people who got concerned about the smoke coming into their patch, or was it likely that the people who might be doing that outdoor burning had a chance to be heard in the consultation?
Oh, I couldn't answer that, sorry, Councillor Wilson.
Did we go out with the air zone or something similar to air zone or air shed maps in most of these areas that we consulted in?
No.
Okay.
All right, you're wanting some discussion on the options? That are up there, the 4 options, or are they, I suppose? Oh, good, Councillor Wee.
I'm just wondering, I guess, if we're envisioning the same option for every area we're talking about, or if we're expecting maybe like the potential for 10K buffers for that first tranche of towns, and then like 5Ks for the other, or like, are we intending to apply the same zone for, obviously if we have bespoke buffer zones then that changes that, but
so the just to be clear that we were only proposing these for those 6 priority areas.
Okay.
Yeah, and then within that it can be as bespoke or not, as you choose.
I guess my other question was around the bespoke buffer zones, and just on that conversation earlier around bringing in the topography. So if we don't have that information now, like how would we go about creating those bespoke buffer zones that did take that into account?
We would have to go away and have a think about what that might exactly look like. I think if there's a sense that 10 kilometres might be too far, but you still might want a buffer zone, then we need to go away and investigate that.
Good, Councillor Wee, Gallagher, sorry.
But for each of these, we'll have some science to justify why we were proposing each of these 4 options, because to just plonk a 10-kilometre blob around a municipal area then the imposition created across all those people within that 10-kilometre block is going to be quite, that's going to be of concern to them, and it's going to change how they currently function. So we would need some science as to why the 10-kilometre parameter was chosen, and then what we would achieve within it.
And so as I said, we'll check that, and if you haven't had that report, we'll make sure you get that, by the end of tomorrow.
Yeah, for me.
Cool.
Councillor Wilson.
So I'm very concerned about the length, without consideration of what the buffer zones would look like, or bespoke buffer zones might look like in comparison, or even the 5-kilometre buffer zones. I'm really concerned that I think we need to be seeing what all of those options might look like even if it's by just an altitude test. I'm also concerned about consultation on it, because I think the other matters we're raising are quite obvious. This one is less obvious, unless it came with something like a consent that didn't have a charge to it. There are other ways of softening the blow, because it is, I don't think people understand it is exceedingly hard to do a burn off of any scale these days anyway. It's hugely time consuming getting all of your ducks in alignment with fence and with dock, and because most of these areas will be dock boundaries as well. So I just think we need to understand all of those layers before we start adding another layer. And I don't think most of us are at that point yet, but that's just my concern.
Yeah, I feel like we need really good reasons to put them in. We get a lot of complaints in Queenstown, as you know, and these spring burn-offs, and they really, really upset all sorts of people. But we have to, it seems a little bit arbitrary at the moment.
You see the question from?
I think you're referring to section 88, Kate, which talks about rules having immediate legal effect if they are around water quality, and it's not the same for air. So you would still have the presumption of no rules if you were bringing new rules in.
Three.
So while it may capture burn off, that's not the only likely type of burning that would occur in the winter in those zones. Probably more likely to be other types of burning.
Sure.
Yes. Yeah, I think, well, Kate may have been referring to all types of burning, but the big rural burn-offs, that'll be 200 hectares of a sprayed gully, they will be quite well planned. But there will also be other burning that'll be small piles that have been left to dry. Just the stuff that you always have that's built up in a pile. You've stacked it up with a digger and left it there to burn at a time when it's suitable to burn. And in the main areas, certainly for the central Otago towns, that is a very tight window that's getting even tighter. The restricted burning season is quite limited as it is, and it gets tighter. So with the big, the very unpopular burns, I suppose for a lot of them, the people doing them would view them as an utter necessity. They are a very short window of unpleasantness to create the benefit that comes from what they're trying to do from a land improvement perspective. So yeah, I'm not a fan of the buffer zone proposals That's not becoming apparent. But
And what's the winter period? What's the actual dates from start to finish?
So yeah, that's yet to be decided.
Right.
Pretty much.
I think we've probably got enough to move forward. We'll have some options in the paper for next week, some maps and some different zones. And if we can get some kind of bespoke buffer zone in there as well, we'll do that. And the option of no buffer zones will obviously be there as well.
Good.
I'd just like to note and bring to everyone's attention that, you know, as Gary was saying, there's people who are, you know, won't be keen on buffer zone, but we have got here a conflict between our two main economic drivers in the area that I live, tourism and farming. And there is a real conflict between those two things. And having burn-offs at the end of winter and at the beginning of the spring are typically large Asian and American visitor numbers is really upsetting for a lot of people. I don't like it, but it doesn't particularly disrupt my economic activity, but it certainly does for many people in Queenstown. So, yeah, something we have to consider.
Good. I thought Councillor Methven was going to have a comment, but I think we might have.
I was just getting out a bit of hot here.
I think we've come to the conclusion
That
of
one.
the workshop. So thank you very much for those clear papers and taking us through discussion, and for councillors and Karen for the input. So I hope you're sufficient, and as you've said, Anita, able to now go forward and develop a paper. So ngā mihi atu, kia koutou katoa, and I think we can close the meeting a bit earlier than was anticipated, and I'll do so using my karakia. I think there's one here, but got used to my own, sorry. So anyway, unu here, tūru tapanui, kia mama, kia wātea te nākei tēnā me te wairu, i tāra takatū, ko i ara e rongo, i whakeiri ake. Kei roka, haumi e hui e
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody.
Ka kite.